Hello YouTube and welcome back to another week of VCT PACIFIC ROSTERMANIA updates. My name is William Cho. I'm one of the casters for VCT Pacific, and we've been keeping track of roster updates, both some substantial rumors and then obviously official announcements, and we'll do our weekly ranking of how we think each roster stacks up against each other so far. We actually have a handful of confirmed updates this week, so we'll jump right into it. So before we kick things off, let me actually just move these here so it doesn't get confusing. Just so everyone is clear, this is the color code. So the blue means that it is a new player added to the roster and it is 100% confirmed, aka announced by the team. Green means that the team has announced that they will be continuing, the player will be continuing with their roster. It doesn't even necessarily mean that the contract is renewed. It's just that if they made an official announcement or not, which again, I'll talk about it as we go through, but really it just applies to Lightning Fast. Like, I can't imagine a lot of other teams are going to like make official announcements for all of their existing players. They might do like a full 5-man roster, announcement once the rebuild is done, but we'll get to that when it happens. Yellow means that there are rumors, and I'm not picking up on like every single rumor out there, but ones that have cycled around enough, and maybe, people are continuing to find like these clues and things that really point in that direction. But at the end of the day, rumors are just rumors. Red means that the player has been released and they are out of the roster, or that they are looking for new opportunities, and that's things that are officially announced. And purple is if I'm ever putting down my own personal guesses that don't have any proof or clues. But this has not happened yet, so we'll see if we get to that this week. Probably not this week. With that in mind, let's actually, you know what, I'll work on this next week. I didn't write down which ones are new this week, but if you've been keeping up, we actually have a decent amount of updates this week. So Paper X, no updates. Again, I don't expect them to make any more, except maybe announcing a 6-man if they so choose, because I believe that is not required anymore. Going into 2024, my light's on, right? It feels so dark. DRX, no new announcements. Again, don't expect that to change. T1, no new announcements. I can't imagine this is going to change it unless they continue to gel with this roster and just something's not working out between the existing 3 during the offseason. Now, we have to remember the offseason's a decent amount of time. It's until the beginning of next year. And then even then, they still have a decent window to continue making updates to their roster. This time, the windows kind of extends into a good part of the year next year. So we'll keep in mind. But as we do this during the offseason, I don't expect this to change. The only thing is maybe if they release one of these 6 just to really bring it down to a core 5. But I also wouldn't be surprised if T1's one of those teams that still tries to stick with a 6-man roster. We talked about the potential strengths of those. I'm not counting too much of their performance over at the Carmine Core event, but as we continue to see more offseason events, I might make some new comments if we see the full roster, especially with Excurate playing. Okay, the next team, we actually had a solid and exciting update. It's going to be GenG, the Korean squad that had a great start last year, even at lock-in, with a decent performance against Loud, and eventually just crashed and burned through VCT Pacific. Let's not focus on that part too much because it's quite depressing. But we just had Texture being announced on GenG, and supposedly, I didn't actually go back and check the clip, mostly because Twitch clips don't work in Korea, but supposedly Texture was talking about it on stream as well. He had several offers from multiple other teams, but he wanted to go back to a Korean squad, so he chose GenG. Now that tells us 2 things. 1, Texture had a couple choices. 2, okay, so as we expected, GenG seems to be building a Korean-based team. Maybe they add someone where they need to mix in a little bit of English comms. That could be a possibility, but they're not going for like a full mixed, basically APAC roster, right? So GenG looks to be focusing on a Korean squad. Now, Texture, this is honestly, if throughout the past years of VCT and Valorant esports, if you were to bring out, I guess, this entire set of names, including the team name, right? Say, GenG's building a Korean squad, and they want to build it with Meteor and Texture. you would say that they have a very good start. The only thing is obviously both Meteor and Texture are known to be duelists. Texture was playing mostly Sentinel this year in 2023 because of the role swaps on Global Esports, but he was always known as a great Jet, and so was Meteor. So, okay. Now, technically, maybe a bit of a clash. However, Texture has proved that he can play very well as a Sentinel, and he's going to be very reliable on Global Esports. So, you already have that bit of flexibility. Also, we've seen that double duelist can really start to make waves in certain metas, as we saw in 2023, especially the later part of the year. So now this gives you that opportunity, right? You can have one of them playing Jet and the other playing the Raze, right? Now, I won't say that both of their Jets are way better than their Razes, but you still have that option, right? Or maybe the Neon, something like that. So you have a little bit more flexibility if you wanted to run a double duelist composition. This also means that if Meteor wants to go back and play Chamber on certain maps, because Meteor, much more than just a really good Jet, which he was, he's much more of a really good Opper, right? So if Meteor wanted to play Chamber on certain maps, Texture could still be the duelist. There's several options they can go here, but the bottom line is both of these players are known to be very good in their own physical skill, and they're both really strong Oppers, especially in Korea. They're probably one of the best Oppers within Korean players, right? So it's a very good foundation. If they literally just had people who are like consistent, not maybe one other person that has a bit of an X factor, but if they just had people who are consistent, have good comms, and can bring up good morale and mentality, I feel like this team could, once again, they could compete. I'm not going to say I think they could maybe vie for like top 2, but I think they could try to vie for top, 3 to 5. That doesn't mean, again, that it's impossible for them to get to the top. It's just I'm having a hard time imagining a roster where I'm like, okay, this is absolutely a top 2 team, just because the top 2 are they're pretty stacked. So it's a little rough. It's not to say that other potential rosters are bad. It's just that the bar is very high right now in Pacific. But it's a pretty exciting start. And it makes sense, right? Texture left Global Esports, and a lot of people are wondering, where is he going to go? GenG, they need to fill out the entire roster, and Texture's a great place to start. You can continue to have that conversation of, well, do you want to play only Duelist? Do you want to play only Sentinel? Do you not mind bouncing back and forth between the two? At that point, then really, as long as you just have a dedicated controller, you could even have 2 more flex players. I don't know if that would be my recommendation. I think you probably want still a dedicated primary initiator, like an info initiator, and then someone else to kind of flex around. But you have more options now. And again, you have 2 really strong powerhouses in terms of firepower, at least at their peak. Meteor definitely has these waves where I think his mental gets to him a bit, but they've both proven that at their peak, they are pure powerhouses, so a great place to be. You already have 2 people with X factors, with clutch factors, 2 people that can op. It's a really, really, really good foundation to build off of for GenG. So curious to see who else they bring up. Now, one thing I think I will mention, I was surprised that I didn't kind of have this written down. I guess this is where we will use the purple. Is that the same tone? Yes, I think so. I think this could work out quite well, right? Bring over Bazi from Global Esports as well. He also used to be a duelist, so he's going to know, as he talks about on Global Esports, he knows how to set up for duelists. He knows what duelists want. He proved that he plays a very good Sky and a Fade, so he can still be that kind of bounce back and forth initiator over on that roster. I think it showed on Global Esports he was still willing to expand his agent pool as well. He's another Korean player. He's got good stage experience, not just in Valorant, but also in Overwatch. So if attitude and all of that, chemistry and morale works out, I think this could be a really, really good core, actually. A really strong core that can start to build something that can compete against the top 2, top 3 of VCT Pacific. So this is my personal, would be kind of cool to see factor here, Bazi. But we'll have to wait and see, because I'm sure Bazi has quite a few offers from here and there, as well as he's quite flexible. And he, again, alongside Texture, proved that he's willing to play on a non-Korean squad. So we'll wait to see. But I think this would be a good start. I think if you had this core, if they added like 2 other guys from challengers that I just, most people are just not really sure of, we haven't seen too much of, I think even then I'd be like, you know what, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I think that's how strong this core would be. But again, even just the 2 is really strong. One other question I will put out there for GenG though is it's interesting that the coaching staff has still not been announced, and they announced their next player, right? So I'm curious to see what kind of the philosophy is behind building this team right now. And hopefully we get a peek at it once it's been built up. It'd be very cool for GenG to kind of release some videos where they're able to kind of get together and talk about what that process was like, what the players were looking for, something like that. Maybe not for the masses, but at least for me, I would find it interesting. So there is that. So yeah, I think for GenG fans, I think you got a good ray of hope coming in here in week 3. We move over to Team Secret. Yeah, I mean, there's just more talk about the rumors of Jansanity joining Team Secret. There's been kind of teases here and there from the team themselves, from some of the players, etc. A lot of people who have followed Jansanity's career are pretty certain that this is going to be the player they are adding as their 5th. Now, people who have followed his career seem quite happy to see that he's joining, and they seem quite hopeful. I'll be very honest, I haven't watched his personal gameplay too much. I was aware of the name, I was aware of his career, but I haven't watched enough to say right now from just off of rumors of like, well, I think this is going to be great or not. So we'll have to wait and see. But a Jet player, mainly a Jet player. So again, they can kind of fill that gap. It still awaits to be seen if Jet will be played as much ever since the nerfs. But we'll have to wait and see. But hey, I mean, again, Envy Jeremy, a really good rising star core to work off of. Jesse Vash, I think, is still a very, very sturdy IGL and a leader just in general for the team. Personally, I've started to lose a little bit of faith on Borkum, but hey, they seem to have faith, so all power to them. So a pretty good core. But Giant Sanity, I mean, I think this is one of those cases where it's like, well, that seems fine. Right? I don't think it's anything to write home about, but I also don't think it's like a, whoa, like, what are you doing there? Like, I think it's fine. And as I've always said for Team Secret, I mean, I think they have their pick, out of the pool, especially out of Filipino players, just because there seems to be so many that are good mechanically. So it really just comes down to who can reel them in. The more I see it, I mean, I don't see Warbirds leaving, right? He was even tweeting out, just something about like what's going on in practice and things like that. So Warbirds prove that he's able to try to reel them in and bring in some of these, foundations, the protocols, the basics, right? The bread and butters for attack FPS. So whoever they bring in, I think you give him the faith that he can make that happen. So if Warbirds stays, whoever joins, I think this is still going to be a very strong contending team for the top half, right? To go into playoffs, to compete at playoffs of VCT Pacific. And I'd be excited to see how Giant Sanity does, just because this would be one of those situations where a player gets his breakthrough and a chance to be on that big stage. We've heard nothing from Zeta still, so we have no idea what's going on there. No updates on the RIQ front. Of course, Australia was announced 2 weeks ago. Jemkin continues to just remain a rumor, but a lot of us, I think it would be so good, and I can see it happening. I'm not going to say I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen, because there's plenty of reasons why it wouldn't happen, but I also don't think it'd be like crazy either. So this, again, no changes from last week. Now, here are some changes. Global Esports. Okay, so we talked about Benkai last week. He was announced then. Lightning Fast was announced then as well. Blaze King has always been a rumor, but finally was announced as joining. And we have, was his last team LPB? Actually? Yes, it was. Okay. We have Russ joining, coming in from EMEA. Now, I'm not the expert on this, so don't quote me, but everything seems to say that Russ does not count as an import, and I'm not quite sure how this whole thing works. Apparently, there's like it's like a green card-ish, permanent residency-ish thing, but it's different. For India, I'm not an expert. I didn't have the time to look into this, but we'll just have to trust I can imagine it being true, so we're just going to trust what the teams have said, what the team themselves have said. So Russ supposedly does not count as an import, although he used to play in EMEA. And Russ is joining Global Esports. First of all, I do think it's cool. Right? That Russ is getting to play on a, South Asian Indian squad. I think it's cool. I think the story is very cool. And now let's talk about the team. The community had just about the type of reaction that I thought they would. Which was, Russ? Really? You're hyping this roster up and you're getting Russ? And then on top of that, this is off the back of Benkai and then Russ? And nothing against either of them, but both of them were kind of these IGLs that had some of their moments, but they're IGLs and that was their biggest benefit. And then you're getting two of them, although, again, Benkai did say in Yinsu's stream that he's not going to be IGLing, so okay, let's take that to heart. So I guess Russ is IGLing, maybe. So, so that's about the reaction I thought they would have, especially because if you didn't follow his career closely, all you're going to remember from him is 2022 Guild Esports, right? And the last time he was playing at Guild Esports was at Copenhagen, and let's just be honest, it wasn't a great tournament. It wasn't a great tournament for us. All right? It was not. Can we even find him? Oh, look. It wasn't a good... I didn't know it was this bad. It wasn't a good tournament for us. So I'm just going to say it like it is. You cannot blame the masses for having a giant question mark on why he was picked up. All right. Oh, this is even worse than I thought it was. I remember, because I was casting in Korea for this, I remember during the tournament, I was like, damn, Russ is having possibly the worst tournament he could. And I just feel for the guy because, like, this was a big... people were talking about Guild as, like, this top contender from EMEA. And Russ was... at this tournament, again, nothing against the player himself, but at this tournament, almost single-handedly tanking those chances, right? So it wasn't a good look. It's not a good memory, right? And then the team falls apart. And then you got to look at the rest of the roster. You got Safe, you got Trex, you got Leo, all these players that continue to take the spotlight on their new rosters. Koda Menta, not as much, but also just as, a player who has the IGL experience, who has the veterancy. Okay, so you're looking at all that. But Russ started to IGL quite a bit, if I'm not mistaken, on Guild as well, especially at Copenhagen, if I'm not mistaken. So everyone else still is taking some spotlight. They all got into franchising, except for Russ. So the masses outside of people who are following, VCL or who are following Russ as a personal fan, the last memory we have is a very, very low point of Russ's career. So again, I don't blame the majority for the reaction they had. Looking at chat, Russ didn't play in franchise yet, so maybe he gets to choose between his residencies, but India doesn't allow dual citizenship. Yeah, so I saw, basically, I'm working off of Reddit comments, which is not the best place to get your information, but supposedly there's like a different way that it works for India. Like, it's not dual citizenship, but you can have this... It's because of the history of all territories, etc., etc. That's how I understood it. It's not that you, like, as a foreigner can get this form of permanent residency, but supposedly there's this extra factor. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's because you didn't play in franchise yet, so you can choose where to register as. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure if you go through the rule book, I'm sure we can find out, but supposedly that is the case. And considering that Global Esports seems to have been very careful about, like, waiting to announce until everything is solid, I'm going to assume that they got confirmation from Riot, but that is also just an assumption. But just on that note, for instance, like, I have a very specific visa in Korea that other foreigners cannot get because I have family that always had Korean citizenship, right? I don't know if the fact that I used to have Korean citizenship matters in this application. I don't think it does. But the fact that my at least one of my parents had maintained Korean citizenship for their whole lifetime allows me to get this like family visa. So maybe it's something like that. Although mine isn't like permanent residency because I have to reapply every couple years. But so not sure about the whole citizenship part. But hey, we'll just take it as is, right? The team is saying that Rust does not count as an import. So far we'll take that at face value. Now, let's talk about Rust as a player, though. Even at Copenhagen, I forget which map it was. But there was a game where Russ actually played his heart out, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to say it was in the group stage, though. I could be wrong here, and this isn't working out. This could be bad. Maybe I should have looked this up before. Where did we go? Where are the playoffs? Oh, that's it. So maybe not. Oh, maybe it was a single map. I'm looking at match stats. That's why. Okay, so you know what? Maybe my memory's a little skewed. The thing is it was very clear that at Copenhagen, I will say this, even casting, and I'm not to say that this is an excuse. I mean, listen, you can either handle it or you can't. So it doesn't quite help, but it was very clear that the whole IGLing on, and then fragging wasn't working out for him. Right? So there is that. Now, assuming that Benkai isn't IGLing, I'm going to assume Russ is IGLing here. So who knows how that's going to work out. But for people who followed their run, they seem quite hopeful that Russ will continue to do well. That he's proven himself. I mean, he's not that far off, right? Playing Flex Initiators. I think he did fine stat-wise. If we were to just take a look at stats, I'm not going to lie and say, I'm not going to pretend that I watched the VCL. I didn't, I'll be very honest, except for, the finals and such. But stat-wise, he performed just fine, right? So I think our memories from 2022 are a bit skewed. I'm not going to say that I think it's a signing that to write home about. It's not a signing to get excited about. But I don't think it's a signing to be disappointed about either. I think there's something to be looked at. Now, the only question here is, what's everyone playing? Right? What is everyone playing on this roster? Right, so we have Blaze King, who was announced, who's bounced around quite a bit, but mainly he's been a Sova player. But he's starting to play more controllers here and there when needed. So he's a bit of a flex between controller and initiator, but let's consider him a Sova. So you've got your Sova/Fade. Let's assume... I mean, Benkai's played Flash Initiators and Sentinels, but Russ has also played Flash Initiators and Sentinels, so we can get rid of some of these tabs here. I guess he's mostly only played Sage, so scratch that. So it's Sage and then Flash Initiators. Okay, so then Russ is probably mainly flashing, Blaze King is flexing back and forth, and Benkai's playing Sentinel? At that point, I'm going to assume Lightning Fast is like your go-to flex. Because if I'm not mistaken... Oh, this is why I was confused. Yeah, Lightning Fast actually used to play mainly Sentinels, but then he was also a good Raze player, so he played, Raze that one time here in Pacific. But other than that, I mean, they're kind of all over the place. And they don't have a dedicated duelist. It could be Lightning Fast. I mean, he's played other duelists in the past. But yes, so Lightning Fast is a great flex. I mean, he's kind of covered all the things except for, I mean, he has played KO, but like Flash Initiators is kind of where he's weakest at so far. But it's something that I believe he can learn because he's played duelists before, and if he's played a decent pool like this, I'm sure he can try to adapt. So that's why I'm going to assume Lightning Fast isn't the primary duelist, and he's meant to be a flex and maybe also kind of assist in that potential double duelist meta. Then let's assume Benkai plays Sentinel. Okay. Russ is flash initiating, and Blaze King is kind of flexing between double controller and info initiating. So you still need a duelist, and I'll say it like it is. As much as I'm trying to put up some cover for Russ, where I do think we're all remembering potentially the lowest point of his career at Copenhagen, where I do think he deserves better credit than that for his performances before and after. I mean, no one here is a player to write home about. Let's just say it like it is, right? They're all pretty good. They've all had moments. Like, Blaze King is a good player. He was single-handedly carrying a lot of these rounds that they had at Ascension this year for Pacific, for Boom Esports. But none of them are like this player where you're like, well, that one player can really change the course of this team, right? Their firepower is just insane, and it can overcome all the things. So they're going to need a powerhouse duelist, is what I'm seeing. Are we working off of the same rumor? Because I don't know about that one. The EMEA rumor for Global Esports. But there's been some rumors here and there about Global Esports as duelist. And if we are assuming everything is true so far, I would also assume that it is going to be an import. But the thing is I don't know many other import duelists that I think would fill that gap where I'm like, okay, now Global Esports is really cooking, right? Like, this is exciting. I think it's mostly just going to be like this could be a decent team. Like, literally in that tone. Oh, you're talking from the Flynn spreadsheet. Yeah, so there are some rumors going around, but I feel like I just haven't seen enough clues that really point to that, so I haven't put it on my own spreadsheet yet. But yeah, I mean, again, unless he can, like, snipe out Ye or Aspas, right? Or Demon 1, I guess. I can't see another duelist that I know is on the market that would make me go, okay, this is also a team like, boy, like the top 6, I just cannot tell who it's going to be. I feel like whoever they add, unless it's really bad, this is going to be one of those teams where I'm like, yeah, like, they could be decent. I mean, they could make playoffs, right? You know, if their chemistry is good. Like, this is a team where I would have to put a lot of disclaimers on, right? Of like, well, if their calling is good and the chemistry is good, like, I think it could be a decent team. Not a team to write off, but not a team to write home about either. So I just feel like Global Esports has a very interesting roster so far. Rossi is not confirmed, but he hasn't officially been released yet either. So we're waiting to see. But Benkai, Blaze King, Russ, and Lightning Fast it's a very interesting roster. It's a very interesting roster. And listen, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, right? Like, if Benkai not IGLing suddenly just starts to pop off, all power to him. I think that'd be great to see. I would love to see it. But they're all players that I'm like, okay, like, they've had their moments. They can clutch up. They have decent veterancy. Let's say that, right? Benkai especially, Blaze King, Russ as well, to a certain extent. They have decent veterancy, so I think their mental is going to be pretty good. And I think they'll hold their own. But, you know, if you know, for instance, like a something comes along, right? If a something comes along and just whacks them on the head, like, who do they have to counter that? I am not quite so sure. So it awaits to be seen. No solid news from Talon, if I'm not mistaken, so we're waiting to see. But I do think it's a pretty strong core. Especially Jip Boys and Garnets, I think, have been one of the actually best pickups of 2023, coming into 2023. It's so sad that it wasn't utilized that well until near the end for Talon, but hopefully they can continue that in 2024. DFM continues to be quiet. And then Bleed. Egoist was announced. Egoist had been rumored for quite some time. For Bleed by some people here and there, but he has been announced. For those who don't know, basically Egoist is like, he's that player that gave them the most trouble despite them pub stomping their own region, right? So Egoist was on X10. He was always there to try to put a stop to Bleed. It never really succeeded, But if you were to ever say, like, well, that was the guy, it's kind of like, well, this is going to stir the pot, but I'm just going to say it. It's kind of like DRX and Lakia back in the day, right? Like, Lakia was giving them trouble, and then they're like, well, who could we pick up as our 6-man? It's like, well, I know this guy that gave us a lot of trouble in this region that we were stomping. So it's not surprising that Egoist was picked up. Now, this does pose similar questions to Bleed, but I would say at a much higher level of, so what are the roles here, right? Because Egoist, mainly a Sentinel, as we can very, very clearly see. I mean, afterwards you see that, okay, he's willing to play a little bit of Flash Initiator, and if he's playing the Breach, maybe he can start to pick up something like the KO in the Sky. But he's a Sentinel through and through. Darion has been playing Sentinel, but I'm sure he can very happily go back to Duelist if so needed. Let's bring up Darion side by side here, right? Obviously, Darion used to be a Jet main, and then eventually he kind of swapped over to Sentinel for Bleed towards later parts of their run. But, okay, so he could go back to Duelist, but then we're hearing rumors that, more and more rumors that Ye is going to Bleed. Maybe it's not finalized yet, who knows, but more and more clues are pointing in that direction. I personally would not be surprised. This is a team that we have heard that tried to offer Ye a position last year as well, and it didn't work out. But okay, so then if Ye comes on, it's like, well, Ye is also, he's like, the question is, okay, well, does he want to play like primary duelist, or would he rather play Sentinel than can op, right? So, especially with Chamber potentially coming back in. So it's like, okay, well, you have 3 guys that can play Sentinel. You have 2 guys that could probably potentially willingly go back to primary duelist, but you don't have anyone else that can like flex into more initiator roles, right? You have Scary, who's the dedicated controller, Crazy Guy, who's the dedicated Sova, the info, and who's IGLing. So while I think if Ye was locked in, this would be a very powerful squad, I'd be very curious to see how the roles work out. Now, I do think Ye might be better on Sentinels. I feel like Ye is best when he can just, you know, kind of do these stutter peaks and then just kind of wait, right? And hold good angles and good crosshair placement. That's where Ye really shines. Not to say that he can't entry. Obviously, he used to be a good entry as well, but I feel like his strongest point is there. At which point, I guess, maybe Darion goes back to primary duelist and entry. And then you could always kind of do double duelist if you needed. You know, that option is there. And then Egoist goes on to Sentinel. That's an option. So I'm curious. Regardless, I do think you're probably getting someone who... Well, no, but if Ye, other than double duelist, if Ye's playing Sentinel, yeah, what is Egoist playing? Like, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. So I am curious. But I gotta imagine you're getting someone who can play entry. Maybe Darion will go back to being primary duelist, but you get someone who can play entry. I think you surely you do. So, roles are a bit of a question, but I think Egoist is a great setup. Again, I think these 3 are a really solid core, so if you get, you know, other people who are pretty solid as well, you're gonna be fine, right? You already have Scary Guy, who has an amazing X Factor, and Darion has a decent amount as well. So getting another person who's just reliable, you know, has good aim and can work with you, that's great. If you get someone like EA who has a bunch of X Factor as well, then again, I think this team goes right up to the top, you know, 5, top 6 easily in VCT Pacific. But if it's not EA and it's someone else who's like, okay, they're like a decent duelist or whatever, I still think they're a good contender for playoffs. So we'll wait to see. But Egoist, again, not anything too surprising, not anything to write home about, but for those who haven't followed, he's had a pretty solid career over in the Malaysia Singapore region. Always was the one trying to give Bleed trouble, and now he's on Bleed, so we'll see if that chemistry works out. So that's it. We had some solid updates, but nothing too crazy. That's it for week 3 of VCT Pacific's Rostermania. Can't wait to see what other announcements come through. They're coming through quite quicker than I thought they would, which is why we started the series. We'll see when everything settles down, when the dust settles. Who do we got? What are we looking forward to for 2024? Let me know what you guys think of the announced roster so far. Let me know what other teams or players you're looking forward to the most down in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like and to subscribe for the channel if you like the content, and we will continue this once again next week for week 4. I'll see you then.